Hey everybody, in this episode we have on Amber Hollingsworth, and she is the founder of Put the Shovel Down, which is a huge YouTube channel. She's coming up on 800,000 subscribers. What does she do? She helps families and loved ones and addicts navigate recovery and sobriety. She has a phenomenal platform. She talks in detail about what it was like for her when she worked in the treatment space and ultimately why she migrated away from that and started her own practice. And she's doing a great job. Tons of resources for anybody if you're navigating addiction. Ben and I, we left this episode wowed. And that doesn't happen all that often. She has such good information and she could be such a good resource for you. She's really making a huge impact. I know you're going to love this episode. Now, before we get to that though, I want to tell you about the Big Book Study. This is every single Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern time. It's myself and Eric, and we're breaking down the Big Book of AA. Now, if you're a family member or loved one and you want a better understanding of why your loved one drinks the way that they drink or they use drugs, why they do that, what's behind all that, you got to join this because we're breaking it down line by line, and you'll have such a better understanding of your loved one's behavior if you understand this book. And if you're in recovery and you just want to deepen your knowledge of the Big Book, join us. Where can you find this? You can go to realrecoverytalk.com/bigbookstudy, put your email in, and we'll send you all the information. Next, I want you to go onto Facebook and type in the Sobriety Network. That's our Facebook group. It's 100% completely free, and it's for anybody navigating addiction. Whether you're a family member, loved one, you're in recovery, you need to be in recovery, we want you there. Conversations are happening there. We're just talking all things addiction, sobriety, and recovery. So, I hope to see you on the Big Book Study. I hope to see you in the Sobriety Network, and I really hope that you enjoy this show. Today we have Amber Hollingsworth, and she is in fact the founder of Put the Shovel Down. Now, if you don't know what Put the Shovel Down is, it's a very large YouTube channel on YouTube. I think you're almost at 800,000 subscribers if I'm accurate. Phenomenal resource for family members and loved ones and people that are in recovery, just as a place to go to get education around addiction and alcoholism and family dynamics and stuff like that. Now, the reason we wanted to have Amber come on the show is because obviously we work in the same space, and there's plenty of addicts out there, plenty of alcoholics, and there's just, if we can have as many people collaborating and working together for the overall cause of sobriety, it's best case scenario. So Amber, really appreciate you coming on the show today. And Ben, kudos to you for setting this up. And yeah, I mean, like I shared before, press and record, I often go on your YouTube channel to pull ideas for our podcast. And so selfish in the sense that I look for some of your videos that have a lot of views on it, and I'm like, okay, we need to talk about this.
I'm flattered. I love it.
Yeah. So, but again, really appreciate you coming on. Ben, why don't you do a little introduction and we'll get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I wanted to touch on was, people that listen to our podcast, we not intentionally, but it does come up. We operate a drug treatment center in West Palm Beach, Florida called Rock. And if you look back at the history of the podcast, Tom's the one that started in his underwear in the closet, first episode. I bring that up all the time, kind of chuckling about it because of how far it's come at this point. But Tom's intention at the time was, here we are treating the addicts, the alcoholics, and the family's not getting a message. And what we were seeing on our end is we got the addict alcoholic doing all this work in treatment, getting healthier, and then going back to an environment where the family hasn't done any work. And so the main focus was like, okay, how do we help the family so that, because in essence, it affects everybody and we'll have better outcomes when the individual goes home, etc. And when we came across your channel, it seems like that's a lot of what you do. If I'm understanding correctly, you do also work with addicts and alcoholics too.
Oh, that's spot on. That's kind of how I came to it. We have the same origin story there with the content creation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just for our listeners too, like, maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you got into it, a little bit about you, anything that you think is vital to them hearing about, Put Down the Shovel as an organization.
Sure. Well, I'm a licensed counselor. I'm a master addiction counselor and a licensed mental health counselor. And I've been doing this work for more than 20 years now. I know that makes me sound old every time I say it. Long time. And the first 10 years of my career, I worked in an inpatient facility that had detox, it had partial hospitalization, it had IOPs, if people know what that means, it had mental health, severe mental health, it had it all. And I worked all over that hospital. And what you end up seeing, and it was more of an acute care, so it was more of a 1 or 2 week stay. And what you end up seeing in a place like that is the revolving door. And you see the same people coming back over and over and over. And eventually, that kind of hurts your spirit, it gets to you after a while. And so after looking at that for a lot of years, not that, I mean, the place I worked was a great facility. I mean, they did really good work at what they did. It wasn't the facility, it's the nature of the beast, I guess you would say. But you see, we're looking at, what's going wrong here. And a big piece of that is that who really wants information and help is the family members. And when you work in a treatment center, you're getting all these calls all the time. What's going on with them? I can't believe you're releasing them. And sure, there's like a family night where families come and they listen to a seminar or something like that. Maybe one family session or something like that, but that's all they get. And then we take this person, and the situation where I work, they barely sober, a few days or something, and release them back out. And it just didn't work. It was just the setup, right? It was just a going back out in the same environment. And I have found that, and I found this actually when I worked with teens, this is how I sort of really learned this, was that if you can get families to understand what's going on, that matters as much or more as what you do with the patient. That's what I learned. Like if I can get the family to understand and get it, the patient's chances of getting better is actually, that's more important in my experience than what goes on with the patient. And so when I worked with teens, I had this whole program to myself. So I got to like design it how I wanted to. It was just me. I did what I wanted to, which was nice. It was kind of at night, everybody else was gone. So I developed this whole family program, and I spent a lot of times with these families. And then the families program grew, and they started like having mentorship. They started mentoring the other parents, and this whole big system sort of came out of it. It got to the point where like we used to meet in the gym of this facility I was at, like the basketball gym. And it got to where, the parents started in that room, and it got to where they were like nearly outgrowing that room. That wasn't the size of a high school gym, but it was big. And so it got huge. And even kids who would come and go in the program, their parents would stick around. And so what I learned from that is just invaluable about the combination of helping the whole family system. And so that's what really drove my thinking around what I wanted to do. When I left that facility, I started my own private practice. And I wanted to do something to treat the whole family system. And that was sort of the beginning of our Hope for Families model. That's the name of my practice. And we developed a whole system for it. So the way we do it, I call it lawyering. The person with the addiction gets a counselor. That's usually me. And the family members get a counselor. And I have these other counselors that do that. We separate them because it doesn't do so good to put them in the same room, especially not in the beginning. We separate them, and everybody gets an advocate. That's why I call it lawyering. I always say I'm a defense attorney. I tell my clients, my job is to dig you out of whatever hole you done got yourself in. I am on your side. It's my job to see your point of view. Your family's got their own person. It's their job to see their point of view. And then a lot of times we mediate a lot of that in the background to help things run smoother at home. And actually, you might think people might not want their family members coming, but they actually are like, has my mama been in here lately? Has my wife got her appointment? Because she needs to be in here. They love it actually because it makes their life better. And it just works better. We have better outcomes because of it. And then out of that came the YouTube.
Absolutely. I always like to point out the evidence and consistency of the message because we essentially say the same thing. We were seeing the same thing within Rock, and we actually started a family weekend a number of years ago. And a lot of our clients are from out of state. You know, we do have some local people, but quite a few of the families would fly in. We'd spend an entire 2 days with them, and we noticed almost immediately that the outcome started getting better. And the other part of that too is that the families stayed involved with us even after treatment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because the level of education and knowledge they get, almost in a way I kind of see it as now they're learning how to do their part with the accountability. There's a funny story that Tom and I bring up once in a while. We had a client here that ended up coming through our program, graduated the program portion successfully, and mom stayed in touch with us indefinitely. She still calls all the time to this day, years later. And I remember Tom and I, we were sitting in the parking lot of Sprouts going to pick up some lunch, and she called us all concerned about her son. Oh, he's not going to his meetings. And I'll make up a name for sake of this, but Tom turns around and says, well, Susie, how many of your meetings have you been to? Well, none. And bringing the focus back to her and her part, and allowing her son to do what he needs to do. So there's just a lot of consistency and evidence there. I like pointing it out because you have the same message with that we do, so it must be true.
Right, absolutely. That's my experience, and I love that story that you're telling because I talk to families about that. I say, I know it's frustrating when to you and your loved one says, well, I don't like those meetings, or I don't want to go, or they say the same things. And I said, but how many meetings have you been to? Haven't you had that same experience? And they're like, yeah, kind of, some of them are okay and some of them aren't. I was like, okay, then. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not trying to be sober. Like there might be some legit something there, right? And to have that sort of empathy. And when you have a conversation around that, when you can be like, yeah, I get it. Like sometimes it is annoying, sometimes it's great. Then your loved one's going to be a lot more open to hearing you because you're going to understand them better instead of coming at them from a place of fear or criticism or something like that.
So less, if I'm hearing it correctly, less judgment, like more empathy and compassion, if you will, in a way.
Yes, but if it's okay if I say something about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the people I follow is this guy named Chris Voss. He's a hostage negotiator, and he talks about empathy. He calls it strategic empathy. So I'm like, I'm not telling you to feel sorry for the person. I'm telling you to do it this way because this is what works. I strategically want you to say these words. Because sometimes with your family member, you're like, they don't deserve it. I'm mad at them. And I'm like, there's probably a good reason why you feel that way. But I want you to say it this way anyway, because here's what happens in their brain. Here's how they can respond. And I really walk them through why empathy works. I'm not just a counselor being like, oh, woohoo, sunshine and rainbows. I'm like, scientifically, this is what is happening and why I want you to do it this way. And they're like, okay, I got it.
Oh, that makes absolute sense. People want to hear logic. Logically, why is this going to work?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of like a hard sell, and obviously you've gotten really good at it. So.
Yes.
I had a couple of questions up to this point. I want to go back to your time working in treatment. And if you were to pinpoint maybe a couple of reasons as to why it was, I'm reluctant to say it wasn't successful because, we obviously operate a treatment center and, I think we do very good and a lot of our clients stay sober, but I totally understand where you're coming from, that it's tough. It's a tough space to work in. The outcomes aren't always what we want them to be. But if you were to pinpoint like a couple of reasons as to why people aren't successful, even if they complete, well, let me ask you this first. The program in particular, how long was it?
Well, the facility I worked at had so many programs, like it had a detox, and that was usually 5 to 7 to 10 days, something like that. Well, we also had, partial hospitalization programs that were probably a month long. And then we had like intensive outpatient programs that were maybe 6 weeks to 3 months long, so it ranged in in the amount of time, but the amount of time people were inpatient probably wasn't much more than 2 weeks.
And the IOP portion, did they have like supportive housing and stuff?
Not at the place where I worked, no.
Okay. Um, so if you were to pinpoint like a couple of reasons that people aren't successful when they go through a program like this, because I mean, Ben and I, and you, Amber, the repeat offenders, we see them. They're there, you know, and especially down here in Florida, there's a lot of treatment centers. There's not near as many as there were 7, 8 years ago. But sometimes people, they just get on the what we call the South Florida shuffle, and
Yeah.
they go from treatment center to treatment center. What is it from your perspective? Like, if you were to say, these are a couple of things that I would want to change with the treatment process, what would those be?
Immediately, sort of three things come to my mind. One piece is family piece, and we already talked about that a little bit, so I'll just leave that there. Another piece is, I think, treatment. In the treatment where I worked, I can't say for everywhere, but I think it doesn't focus enough on the person's motivation for getting sober. They just assume that you're here, you want to get sober, and so they jump into telling you how to do it instead of finding out where you're at in your stages of change, or where you're at in your motivation level, or why you're wanting to get sober. And I feel like, in my experience, it's not ever a matter of someone not knowing how to be sober or even get sober. It's a matter of how bad they want to get sober. What are their reasons for getting sober? How do they stay motivated even on bad days? So I spend most of my energy doing that. I mean, I can tell people what to do, but people inherently know what they need to
Yeah.
do and what they're not changing that they need to change. And so my job is to get them excited about it. My job is to get them feeling confident and positive and optimistic about it. And I feel like treatment centers, sometimes they skip that part because they assume if the person's here, they're motivated. But most time people get leveraged into treatment. Most time people get leveraged into seeing me. So
Yeah.
I spend the majority of my time on that. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is just a lot more complicated and big picture. And I think it has to do with insurance and the way that payment works. When I
Hmm.
worked in a treatment facility, it was insurance driven. And when you're insurance driven facility, you spend all of your time doing paperwork, like literally 85% of your time doing paperwork, 15% of your time on patient care. And that's the problem, right? Because you're spending all your time justifying to the insurance company why to pay and why this person needs to be here, which leaves very little time to actually work with patients. And that's a system that's, bigger and more complicated than any of us. So I don't
Yeah.
know that I don't have the answer to that one, but I do feel like that's part of the issue.
So I want to cover on each one of those, going back to the motivation piece.
Mhm.
Um, we hear it all the time, and Amber, I'm curious to know your answer on this. How many times, let's just say you have 100 conversations with family members or loved ones in some capacity. Out of those 100 conversations, how many times do you hear, well, they have to want to get sober in order to get sober? So if they don't want to get sober, what's the point in doing anything? Do you hear that a
Yeah.
lot?
Yeah, 99 out of 100, because they've heard that a lot. And because they've hit the wall with their loved one and nothing seems to be working, and they hear other people saying that. So naturally it's like, that must be true, right? And there's a little truth in that, but there's more to that story.
What would you say is more the rest of the story on that?
Well, I think there are two pieces. One piece is, if you can get someone sober long enough,
Mhm.
their brain will kick in and then they'll decide they want to get sober. Because sometimes they're in such distress, their brain is a mess, the neurochemicals are all over the place, like they literally can't decide they want to get sober. And so you have to get someone sober long enough, and then they like, yeah, I do want to stay sober. So sometimes you just have to get them sober. But it has to be a long enough period of time for that to kick in. That's one piece. The other piece I would say to that is that, yes, in order for someone to stay sober, they have to want to be sober, but there's a lot of things you can do to help someone want to be sober. And that's a lot of what I teach on my YouTube channel is how do I interact with someone in such a way that will get them to go to treatment or get help. Not everyone has to go to treatment. Get help or address the issue, right? There's a lot of power that families have in that dynamic that they don't even realize that they have.
I like that you brought up the interaction, because one of the examples that I like to use, Tom and I, we do a lot of interventions where families will be there. You'll have, say, for instance, mom and dad, and then the potential client. Potential client comes in, they're sunk back in their seat. They look like they don't want to be there. Mom and dad are at the edge of their seat, super motivated, like we want them here, we want them here. And I'll come out of left field because they don't look motivated. And I'll say, hey, Johnny, guess what? I love shooting heroin. And all of a sudden he comes to the edge of his seat. His parents are aghast. Did Ben just say that? But you have to speak their language. And then when they see their loved one come to the edge of the seat, they're like, oh, I kind of see what's going on here. But to your point, it's the old cliche. It has to be attractive. And
I love what you're saying, Ben, because that's an empathy statement, right? And that's what we were talking about before is empathy will get their attention, right? And it gets their defenses down. And then they're ready to hear what you say next. If you don't start from an empathy point, you're going to hit the wall. You're not going to get any further than that.
Yeah, and I tell them all the time
to rebel against you purposefully just because you said it. They want to go against you.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I tell the client all the time, and I'll say it right in front of the parents. I want you to be honest. If your plan is to, say, for instance, to come to our program, and then when you're going to leave, you're like, I'm going back on my Adderall and I'm going to smoke pot. I'd rather hear that through the treatment process rather than somebody feeling like they have to sit there and be dishonest with me about it, because that gives us it opens a door to what we really need to work on
100%
versus them keeping the mask on that they've had on the whole time.
Right.
So,
right. You get compliance, but compliance doesn't make recovery. They figure out what you're wanting them to say and then they just say it. And now what are you doing? Everybody's just sort of playing a game at that point.
Oh, I love that you said that. Compliance isn't recovery. Right. That's good, Tom.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down. Thanks, Amber.
The way I usually say it is I say, sometimes you can force compliance, but you can't force recovery. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, we say this all the time, when I get asked this from parents or told rather, well, they're not even ready to get sober. So when they're ready to get sober, I'll call you. And it's like, well, this very well could be our last conversation. And I said, and I'm always honest with them. Look, when I went into treatment back in 2010, I did not go willingly.
Right.
It wasn't like I just walked into the treatment center like, hello, hey, everybody, I'm here. So glad to meet you. No, that wasn't the case. I mean, the rug got pulled out from underneath me. I found myself in a treatment center. I thought I was going to do 45 days and go back to Pennsylvania and drink like a gentleman.
Oh, yeah.
But through that process, the 45 days, a couple of things happened. I met some really solid therapists that were in recovery. And I'm not saying that you have to be in recovery to be a therapist. That's not why I said that. But it was like they told me their journey. They told me what worked for them. And I'm like, and then hearing stories, and that was really the first time that I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And, they gave us a book, a big book, and I read it cover to cover, and I get into the stories in the back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's me. That's me. And throughout this 45-day period, my therapist and my dad were concocting this plan of going to South Florida, because I went to treatment in Jacksonville, North Florida. And so, I get to day 40 or whatever, and they're like, okay, so do you want to go to West Palm Beach? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm done. And so I remember getting on a call with my therapist and my dad, and my dad's like, you're not coming home. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but what am I going to do in West Palm Beach, Florida? Well, you're going to go to this IOP program. You're going to go into sober living. You're going to do that. And I'm like, cool, I guess, because at this point, now I'm 40 days sober. I've read some of the stories in the book, and I'm like, and I'm feeling good. I put weight back on, and I'm like, heck, snow's about to start flying in Pennsylvania. I'll go down to West Palm Beach. And I've been here ever since, almost 15 years later. All to say, I went into that treatment program thinking, oh, this is it's a phase. I was 26 years old, right? Every 26-year-old drinks like a fish, like I do.
Right.
But it became attractive. And that was the only time I went to treatment. I'm what Ben calls a white chip wonder. And I am, and so I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings when it comes to family members that we hear.
I love that you said, Tom, I love you said it became attractive. That's the thing I think that gets missed sometimes from treatment professionals, counselors, sponsors, family members, is we don't make it attractive. We make it look like punishment. And then I also love what you're saying, Tom, about, you didn't really go because you wanted to go. The whole idea of waiting for someone to want to get sober is a myth. That doesn't happen. People initially get sober because they're backed into some kind of corner where it's like, this is worse than that. I'd rather go to the treatment than go to jail. I'd rather stop drinking than lose my wife. And those are all good reasons. There's no bad reason. Why people get sober is a little different than why people stay sober. But if you're waiting for someone to literally say, I want to get sober, I never want to drink again, what the heck? That flies in the face of what addiction, alcoholism even is. It doesn't make any sense when you stop to think about it. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, and if they do get to the point of saying that, there's events that happen to make them say that. Ben, what's that thing that you always say? The pain of something has to become greater.
When the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change is when we change.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. I want to circle back real quick to the insurance piece. Because I think that's so true. And, for us, this is a battle that we have to fight every day. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but, we treat at max 30 people at one time, right? And we're never at 30. We generally fall but somewhere between 25 and 28, which is good. And we have 3 therapists, 3 licensed mental health counselors, and they each carry a caseload of like 8 or 9 people, but they get buried in paperwork. Got the treatment plans, you got all the progress notes and the master treatment plans and the bios and this and that. And sometimes, and then you start seeing the reimbursements come in from the insurance companies, and it's like $50, $80, and it's like this is crazy. I'm hoping that maybe this changes at some point, but at least it is what it is right now. With what you do with Put the Shovel Down and the organization that you have and you've put together, do you deal with insurance at all, or is it strictly cash pay?
I don't deal with insurance at all. It was a strategic decision I made when I left. Sometimes that's hard for people to understand, but it's what allows me to do what I do. If I took insurance, I couldn't do what I do. I would have to do it like everyone else did. And point, there's a million other places that do it that way. And I'm not, that's nobody's fault. That's a huge system's fault. I don't even know if it's the insurance company's fault. I don't know how to fix that. I just know that the system itself isn't set up a way that's conducive, because if you get paid so little, like what you're talking about, $50 or something like that, you're housing this person, you're feeding them everything, and that means you have to see so many people, right? And so you have to see twice the number of people, and you have to spend 80% of the time on the paperwork. There's hardly any time. It doesn't leave a lot of time for actual direct client or patient, whatever you call them, care. And so the system itself is just difficult. And then even, I mean, you guys would know more about it than I do, but like, let's say someone does have insurance benefits to come to a 90-day program or something. Maybe they have benefit for it, but after they're there 2 weeks and the documentation shows that they're doing better and they're saying the right things, and the insurance company says, well, they're great.
Yeah.
They can go because now it's not medically necessary. So even though it looks like they have the benefit for going 90 days, it doesn't mean the insurance company is going to authorize them that. And being on the treatment end of that, nothing will get me more angry and more upset and thinking more bad words in my head than talk to that insurance company. You know, you're dealing with somebody's son who's using heroin, who you know is literally going to go out and overdose if you don't get them help. And they're like, well, I don't really meet the criteria for IOP. I'm like, what? And then, you know, then you think bad thoughts, and then that messes up my ability to help people because I'm just mad. It's
Yeah.
just crazy making.
Yeah. It's a battle that we've had to fight for better part of 11 years now. And it's, and the thing is, insurance companies are so like no two insurance companies are the same.
Sure.
And I don't want to paint a picture that, because there's some insurance companies out there that are very good. They're great. They're easy to work with. They give you the days. The reimbursement rates are well. And when you get those, it helps to offset the ones and the cool thing about us is we don't let insurance companies dictate clinical treatment.
Right.
If you make it into our doors, which is a privilege for a lot of people because we're very selective on who we bring in. If your insurance cuts you off after 3 weeks, you're with us. So as long as you're an asset to the community and you participate, you do all the right things. Now, if you're an asshole in the community, see you later.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we got to cover that. And I think that the cash pay model is by far the best. And I tell parents that all the time. If you have the abilities to pay out of pocket, pay out of pocket. That way
Right.
you don't have insurance companies trying to dictate clinical treatment,
Right.
So,
And I will say, you know, I do, well, I don't even call it counseling anymore because what I do now is coaching. But historically, I've done outpatient counseling. And so paying for outpatient counseling for yourself and for your family member is doable for a lot of people. Paying for 90 days of inpatient treatment really isn't doable for a lot of people, no matter how much they want. So I get that. And it's not a judgment on insurance companies, it's not a judgment on treatment. It's just a frustrating piece of the system, right? And the thing of it is whoever's paying makes the decisions. End of story. That's it. And so even if it's like a free treatment, maybe it's like a Christian RAM program or a state RAM program, whoever's paying makes the decisions.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's the insurance company, they make the decisions. If it's you make the decision. I mean, that's just, I hate to say it, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, for sure. I had a couple questions written down that I wanted to ask. Looking back over your experience with Put the Shovel Down and everything that you've done, what are some of the biggest struggles that you find with families in particular? Not the addict. I mean, we know what their struggles are. Their brains are hijacked. But with families, like when you're having conversations with families, 100 families, what would you say are a couple of the biggest struggles that you have with them?
One of the first things that comes to my head is sort of the first obstacle when I went out and started this model on my own. The very first obstacle I ran into is how to get families to even engage with you because, and I'll tell you what I learned to do and how I learned to do it, but I'll give you my secret trick to it. But if you tell a family, maybe a lot of times people call me and they say, I really want my son to see you. I really want my wife to see you, but they won't come, right? And there's some things I can do to tell them that might get them to come. I said, but used to, I would say, well, yeah, but if you'll come, I can help you get better, and then that'll help. And they'll be like, I'm not the one that has the problem. I mean, and I can see too where it's almost offensive. Like, I don't need the counseling. They need the counseling. And so the first hurdle I ran into is just even an openness to walk in to talk to you or an Al-Anon meeting or anything else really. And so you want me to tell you my secret trick of how I learned to do that? It works.
Chris?
This is gonna
Love
work.
to hear the secret.
Instead of saying, but I can help you, don't say that because that's offensive. And I get it. Say this, I need you to come in here because when they get here, they're not going to tell me the truth. And I'm going to need you to come in here and tell me what's really going on before they get here. And they will pull up in your parking lot on two-wheel squalling, like literally running out the car into your place to tell you. Once you change how you frame it, yes, you're so right. They're not. Let me come up there and tell you what's really happening. That's what works.
Oh yeah, because they get a chance to point the finger.
Oh yeah, they right. And I'm not saying that just because I'm lying. Like it's true. Like there's no sense in you sending me your family member because I'm only about half the story. Like I'm not even lying when I say that. So I'm like, I'm gonna need you to be involved because otherwise I can only advise somebody based on what they're telling me. And if I don't have the whole story, I'm gonna be giving bad advice. I promise. Because the person's gonna tell you things in such a way to get you to respond to them the way they want you to respond.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a big part of the reason we love getting the families involved, just to what you're saying, because we can sit back as a clinical team at the end of the day, especially after a family weekend, and you're like, this picture's been painted by the client, and then you get the other side of the story and you see the inconsistencies, and it's like, oh, now this is all coming together.
Right. Now I can kind of see what's really happening here.
That's awesome.
It's pretty remarkable. Our therapists are really good with getting the families engaged and them. Well, because a lot of our families, they have listened to the podcast with us and stuff. And I mean, we like beat this drum to no end. So a lot of times they're like, we understand we play just as much of a part as they do. But every now and again, you get the families that they just legit don't care. They don't want nothing to do with it. And you just, and that makes our jobs tough. But if we can pick up on that, a lot of times, the client can pick up on it. And it's unfortunate. It drives a wedge deeper into the relationship. And, sometimes I would venture to say, I see this more often with obviously spouses than I do with moms and dads who have their children, because we have an innate want to keep our children safe for the most part.
Right.
Spouses, on the other hand, they were like, okay, we entered into an agreement on the wedding day, but you're an absolute lunatic and I didn't do anything to cause this, so you need to go fix your shit. And
I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, I didn't sign up for this, and I may be back here when you're done. I may not, and that makes it tough because it's like I don't know. It's frustrating, especially from our perspective as professionals that do this and can really see the transformation that can happen within families. And some people are just so bullheaded that they're like, nope, I don't want nothing to do with it. I'm going to go play in my own sandbox. And I don't know. It's frustrating.
And there are so many good reasons for that. And I say, I can't even tell you I feel different. Because some of these spouses, I'm like, I'm going to tell you what to do to fix it. But listen to stories, I'm like, man, I'd have been out way before you. So all respect. But we have a person that typically sees parents, and she's got 2 sons in recovery herself. And then we have a person who typically sees the spouses. And what's interesting is the parents come in desperate and scared, and the spouses or the partners come in furious.
Yeah.
And the person that sees the spouse, she's like, they're kind of scary. These moms are so accurate. She's like, I've got to kind of make me scared. And I don't blame them. Like when you hear what's going on, of course you are like furious. I mean, there's a reason why you're furious. It's not just because you're a hateful, bad, non-empathetic partner. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if they have children too.
Exactly.
That makes it even more tough.
Oh yeah.
So as far as the what do I have written? Do you have how long have you had Put the Shovel Down now going?
I got a little alert on my YouTube thing, my like studio thing that came up and said 9 years this week.
Wow, good for you.
Ah, that's awesome.
Right. But I think I actually created it, honestly, and it sat there for a couple of years. I may have threw 2 videos or something on it. And then it wasn't really till 2018 that I really started like I really did it like consistently. So
And how many
officially
videos?
9 years, but probably in reality since 18. So however long that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many videos do you put out a week?
I put out at least two. One, like pre-recorded, edited video, with like cool graphics and stuff. And
Yeah.
then one live video where I go live every Thursday at 1 and I teach something and I present a topic. And then at the end, I take questions so people can come live and ask questions and give feedback and stuff like that.
When is that? Every
Every
Thursday?
Thursday at 1 Eastern.
Thursday. I'm gonna log on to that.
You're gonna get on there and ask me the hard questions. You're gonna make me sweat.
Yeah.
All right.
So, Amber, how would you handle this situation?
No, I get a lot of that.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask you was over the 9 years or 8 years that you've been doing this, do you have any specific examples of transformations that you've seen that just stick out in your head that like this was what it was like in the beginning and this is what it's like now? And can you share on that?
I mean, I get emails and comments on the videos all the time that are saying, thank you so much. I started listening to this channel 2 years ago. I thought it was the end. And now, like, my kid's actually doing really good and we have a great relationship, or my spouse went to treatment and, things are wonderful. I get that kind of thing a lot. But one of the things that I can see as evidence for myself is just the way that people come into me, as far as like if, I see very few clients anymore. But the ones that I see, it's so interesting now about how they show up to me versus how they did all these, years before. Because now when people come to me, it's almost always because their family's been following my YouTube channel. And historically, when people showed up to me, they may have got leveraged. So, I mean, literally I've had people tricked, like tell their person, hey, we're gonna go out to eat lunch, drive up to the office, let the person get out and like drive off. Like, see, that has happened, like tricked into seeing me. And I can do that because I've done that for so many years. I can engage people who don't want to be there, but it takes me 6 months of relationship building. I mean, that's just a lot of counseling to pay for me to even get the person to think about maybe I want to change, right? But now when people come to me, what happens is when I have this first, meeting or something with people, I'll say, why are you here? And they'll say, well, I'm here because, my wife wanted me to, or my parent wanted me to, or my sister, whatever. But actually, and then they'll start naming all these reasons why they need to change. I mean, they're in the active stage of change when they come. So it's like, I can see and I can just tell by what this person tells me, I can literally picture what their family members been doing to get them there. And I'm just thinking, yeah, like in my head, I'm so excited. And it's like now when they show up to me, they're ready and I can just like get to work. And the amount of time that they need to see me is cut down to a third or a fourth. Because
Wow.
when they come in the door, they're coming in ready. And that to me, I mean, it's exciting because it makes my job easier. For one, but it's just exciting to see people change and stay better, quicker, because when you're in this field and you do this work, it's exhausting work. The average time an addiction counselor stays in the field is 5 years. I'm like, it takes longer than 5 years to get licensed to do this. Okay.
Yeah.
So like, that's horrible when you think about that. And that's because it's, you get compassion fatigue. It wears you out seeing it not work and seeing the resistance over and over and over again. But it's exciting now because people come in either in an action stage or right there at it. And so
you're saying that's
it.
because they've seen your content and essentially like got a little knowledge and education on it.
It's because the family has seen my content. And a lot of what I have a program I call the invisible intervention, and it teaches family members how to get people out of denial and into the action stage of change. And so it's all this pre-work that families do. And then I have this whole system. And then when they say, I want my loved one to come, I'm like, all right, here's what I want you to do first. I want you to build rapport before they see me. I want you to find a video of mine that they're going to agree with. Do not go out there and find a video of mine where I'm saying something that you're like, oh, you need to hear this. Don't find that one, because if they walked to my office, I wouldn't confront them right out the gate. Find something that I'm saying something they're going to agree with, maybe where I'm calling out family members for doing something, and introduce them to me that way, and have them watch a couple of videos, have them decide whether they think they're going to fit with me. Then not only has the family done the pre-work, the person's got a chance to even like warm up, decide I like her philosophy or I don't. And then when they come in, not only are they ready to work, but they actually already feel connected to me. Like, I don't even need 6 sessions to get to know you, right? Like, we can just hit the ground running. It's amazing. You can tell I get excited about it.
Yeah, we've essentially had the same experience with our podcast and YouTube.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we'll have somebody come in and they're like, "Oh, you don't have to tell us all this. We already know you guys." And that it's like, if we kind of joke about it, because the first time I ever heard about it, we were dying for a couple of weeks, but I heard Tom on the phone with them. Is this really Tom from YouTube? We were dying for weeks over that, but it essentially it does. It establishes that rapport building and relationship right up front. And when they get here, it's almost as if the decision's already been made.
It has, right? And you're 5 miles down the road, which means less amount of time, less money for them to spend, quicker results. I mean, it just expedites the whole process. And having done it the other way for so many years, I mean, it's amazing the difference.
Yeah. I wanted to spend a couple minutes on Soberlink.
Yeah.
Can I preface this?
Yeah.
Because Soberlink, and I'll let you dive into it, but it's an app essentially that you use for accountability, so to speak. And I'll let you get into that. I'm a big AA guy, and I want to tell you, I was very curious, because there's a line in the big book that says any attempt to shield an alcoholic is doomed to fail. So I was curious for myself. I was like, oh, I wonder what the approach with this app is. And we discussed it a little bit before hitting record, and it really made a lot of sense to me the way that you explained it. I wanted to throw that out there because I like being open-minded. You know, I've coming up in Alcoholics Anonymous, like where, you know, I'm kind of a big book thumper. I'll just call it what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm always looking to keep my mind open to different methods or applications, so to speak. And I just love the way that you explained it. And I wanted to preface that because it really got me thinking after you said it the way you said it. I'm like, that makes sense now.
Right.
So, yeah. But if you want to explain what Soberlink is and all that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's an alcohol monitoring system. So it's a breathalyzer, but there's a whole system, which I'll tell you about. And when you initially think about that, you think that it's designed to catch someone. And I guess you could use it for that, but that's not the way I use it. And that's not the way I recommend it being used. Like, I've never put someone on a Soberlink that doesn't want to be on a Soberlink. The way that I use it is it's a preventative. I don't want to catch someone having a relapse, because it's really hard to get the gate back closed on that once it's open. You know, my goal is to make it easier for you and to hopefully prevent the relapse, because it's just so much easier to stay sober than it is to get sober. So it is a device, and I don't know do anybody watch these, or is it all audio? Because I was just going to show it.
No, yeah, watch. Yeah.
Watch. Okay, they do watch. Okay. So I'll show you guys what the device looks like. I have one here because I'm a big fan. So this is the device. It's a breathalyzing device. Has this little straw. You put it in here. This little part right here, I don't know if y'all can see it, but it's a camera. It has facial recognition in it. So the system part happens is that you put an app, you download a thing, you put your information in, and then you and whoever your accountability person is, it could be your sponsor, it could be your family member, it could be your coach, it could be your good buddy who's in recovery, it could be whoever you want it to be. You and that person decide on a schedule that you want to be tested on. The is 3 times a day. Research has shown that that's the sort of the magic number. It can be more, it can be less. Usually I have people test in the morning when they wake up, before bed, and somewhere in the middle. And I'm not trying to make it hard. I'm like, let's look at your schedule. Let's look at how your day works. It can be different on Wednesday than it is on Saturday, right? Like, let's make this work for your life. I'm not trying to make things hard. I'm not trying to catch you. I'm trying to prevent you. So the 3 times a day, and then they get a text message to their phone that says, hey, you have a test to take, 5 o'clock or whatever. They'll get that text message at 15 minutes before, so like at 4:45. And then they have an hour window. So their test wouldn't really be considered late until like 6. So you really have like an hour and 15 minutes, which is what makes it, I think, doable, because most of the people that I have that use Soberlink are working, they're in school. I can't tell you how many physicians I've had on Soberlink. I know that's scary. It's kind of exciting too. How many businessmen on Soberlink, college. I've had the first person I ever put on it was a fraternity resident. That's all straight. Anyways.
Wow.
But so they get the message, they can take the test. No one ever has to know they're doing it. And then if they're late or they miss it or they're positive or whatever, then their accountability person can get a message that just says, hey, they're late or they had a positive or whatever. And then I can just check on them, because some people say, well, what happens? And then I'll say, well, like a hologram of me appears and it looks at you and it says, I see you. That's what I do. Really what happens is I text you and say, hey, what's up? I saw you're late on your test. And then some people say, yeah, I'm in a meeting. I promise I'm gonna take it in 10 minutes. I'm like, all right, cool. Or they'll say, yeah, I messed up or whatever. And then we'll deal with that, right? So you cannot cheat it. It has the facial recognition. It's funny, I've had people try to cheat it. The only thing you can really do is just sort of skip your test, and that's kind of obvious. So if you skip at your test, that only just really means one thing, especially if you're skipping and you're not communicating about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
So you can't cheat it. It really works. And the way I set it up, I say, listen, we're going to do this if they decide to do it to help, because when you know you have to take these and you know you're not going to fail them, then you just don't have as many sneaky thoughts. You don't have to do this like, will I, won't I, my wife's away for a weekend convention, I can drink this weekend, just this one last time. So you don't, because in early recovery, it's just constant battle. Like, you literally have to make a decision 1,000 times a day to stay sober. And that is exhausting. And people only have a limited amount of willpower. And if you have to make that decision a day and you've had a really bad day, and then all of a sudden you have opportunity, that's a bad scenario, even for somebody who really wants to be, so it takes all that out. You don't have to fire yourself all day, which like frees up all your mental energy to like live your life, do recovery, think about other things, anything you want. And so it makes it a million times easier.
That's the part that really intrigued me, because you said earlier before we hit record something along the lines of they only have to make the decision once.
Right.
And that's when they decide to use Soberlink.
Right.
And that really made sense to me. I'm like, wow. And also, like, in my mind, because I'm trying to think through my alcoholic addict mind, like, I'm like, it helps me think back to like, on that day, I made this commitment and decision to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it does almost in a way, it should make it a little bit easier mentally.
It really does make it a lot easier, because you just don't leave yourself room for the sneaky thoughts. And in those first weeks and months, it's just hard. So they call it white knuckling. It's just hard. You're battling yourself, you're craving, you're battling it, and it just reduces the cravings. You have less sneaky thoughts. You're less likely, you might have one, but you don't entertain it for very long, so it doesn't build to a big craving. So to me, it makes it infinitely easier. And I see people who are not impatient, so that's important. And then it also, because your family knows that someone's handling it, then they get off your back, which makes it another level of easier, because they're not constantly accusing you. They're not doing the secret, I'm trying to hug you, but I'm really smell checking you thing. I'm not watching you on the GPS, because it's being handled. And so you relieve that tension and that dynamic between you and the loved one, even if the results aren't going to the loved one, even if it's going to your sponsor, coach, counselor. then the family member's like, thank God Amber's got it. I don't have to be the police, right? And they feel better and you feel better. And it just makes it so much easier. And then I didn't tell you this before, but lastly, it allows you to get sober or stay sober if you're coming out of facility in your regular life environment. Because let's face it, you got to learn to be sober in real life at some point, going to work and managing situations and dealing with stressors. And so I love Soberlink because most of the people I see that maybe would have had to go to inpatient get sober without having to go to inpatient. And that is amazing. And it allows them to learn new habits and routines while they're doing their everyday life. And to me, that's just like fantastic.
I also want to reemphasize the fact that you said, just in case anybody breezed over it, you said if they want to use it.
Oh yeah.
So it's voluntary, because I've been on probation before and literally stayed clean long enough to pass my probation test, my very last one. I was going to be off probation literally the night before I used, but I was forced to be on probation. Well, quote unquote forced, obviously poor life decisions, but
leveraged into that. Yeah.
yeah. But the fact that you're signing up for this.
Oh yeah, because I'm not gonna force anybody, because then they're gonna be like missing their test. I'm gonna be having to call them every 10 minutes. No, like we're not doing that. This is for you if you want it. Now, sometimes people will get themselves in some trouble, like they'll get a DUI, or heaven forbid, they're going through a divorce and there's a custody issue. And I will say, I think you might should consider Soberlink, because when you go to court, and it's actually court admissible because it has all that facial recognition. I was like, when you go to court for that DUI, we're going to print this report. It's literally going to show you've had 300 alcohol tests that you have passed beautifully, and they're going to see your little face there every single time. They're going to know. And that gets people, out of trouble for the most part. It proves that you are taking it serious. It proves that you're addressing the issue. Or if you're going through a divorce or separation and your spouse is fighting you with custody, they want to leave the kids with you because they're like, what if you might be drinking? Then I'm saying, let's just hook this up, because then you're not going to have to do this. So sometimes people do it for those reasons, and that's still voluntarily. Like, that's not the court making me. It's just me saying, hey, here's a option. Do you want to? And most of the time they do. And then it creates this track record, which helps them even not just stay sober, but helps them fix that external issue that they're battling too.
I want to point out too that we have cases where the client will be coming to us and they will say, I know the accountability with being drug tested randomly and getting random breathalyzers is going to help me. Oh, yeah. We have clients that they want to be sure. They're like, how many times do you drug test me? Oh, good. And because we tell them, and it essentially they're asking for it. So it can be a helpful tool, very much so in the beginning too, because it's
right. But it does need to be an alignment issue, right? Like I don't see any sense in forcing anything. I offered a solution. Some people come in and they're like, they want to be on it the first day. Some people come in and they try off and on other things, and then they decide to do that. But I've never had to force anybody to do that, and nor would I. Here's a tool that you might like for these reasons, and then you tell me if you want to be on it or not.
I remember having a conversation with a mom. This is a couple years back, and I remember her bringing this up in particular, and I'm assuming it was Soberlink. I don't know. It could have been another platform. And I advised her against it. And here's why. Because she was doing it for herself. He wasn't doing it for him. And that was and I'm glad we got to talk about this, because in a lot of situations, I would have been against it. Because I'm always hearing it from the parents or the loved one's perspective. I want my son to be on Soberlink. I want my daughter to be on Soberlink, yada, yada, yada. It's like, well, that's great, but that's really, it doesn't do them any good, because whether you want them on it or not, it really boils down to if they want to be on it or not. That's the same as you going to your son and having a contract on a piece of paper.
Oh
Hey,
my gosh.
Johnny,
Don't
I
get me
want you.
started on the contract.
Yeah.
Oh,
Don't
brought up
don't
the
even get me started
contract.
on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Ben just had this. Ben just had this happen literally 3 weeks ago. It's
Mhm.
very blatantly obvious that this kid needs treatment.
Mhm.
And the parents said, well, he wrote a contract or he signed a contract that he's getting. And I'm just like, oh, good Lord. Like, so, but tying that back into Soberlink, that was kind of my um reference or my
Mhm.
you know what I mean? But
Right.
now it makes sense. So as long as it's welcomed, expectations are set on the front end. This is something that you are choosing to do.
Right.
You're the one that's choosing to blow in this thing 3 days a week or 3 times a day. And if you choose not to, that doesn't hurt anybody but yourself. Like it doesn't
Right.
affect us. And so I like that. I like that. I
Right.
don't like when parents are trying to use it to just control, manipulate, like you referenced the GPS on somebody's phone or
Mhm. Mhm.
tracking their bank account or this. And it's just like, come on.
Right. I love this scenario that you're telling me because the way I would set something like that up, Tom, would be like, let's say this mom, she came to me, she said, I heard about that Soberlink thing, I want my kid on it or whatever. Then I would go to that person and I would say, hey, your mom wants you on this. I don't know if it's going to be worth it to you or not. I'm not going to make you be on it. I'll go back and tell her you don't need to be on it if you want me to. I say, but it's probably going to keep her off of your butt. And
Yeah.
then you're not going to have to
Yeah.
do all that crap and it might be worth it. You might rather blow in that dang Soberlink 3 times a day. The results come to me, not her. Let us deal with it and leave her. And they might be like, so I want that. Or I might say, maybe this is a kid that wants to go back to college or something like that. And I say, listen, let's put you on Soberlink because mom, if I say, hey, he's going like let him go, he's going to be on Soberlink, like you got this. Then sometimes it's just the way you set it up, right? It's
Yeah.
just the way you frame the situation. Do you want it or do you not? And because a lot of people would so much rather do that. Like I had this one woman, she was on this thing like 5 years or something. Not because I tried to, I literally would ask her every time I was like, do you want to keep me on Soberlink? She's like, yes, because I leave, I go to Target. I might be gone longer than I tell my husband, and he's not worried about it. I leave and go with my girls. He's not worried about it. And she says, it is so much easier to do that. And then I don't have to like deal with questioning. He doesn't give me the look. She's like, yeah, I'm staying on it. I was like, all right. Like,
Yeah.
that was their call because it makes their life easier in so many ways. And once they realize that, they're like, yeah, I'd rather take that little sober link than to deal with the constant questioning, the constant accusations, because that's just frustrating. It makes you defensive and then it just makes you want to go relapse, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I mean, I can see it. There could be a point of diminishing return
Oh, yeah.
because in that scenario, like, now it bump and which could be a good thing. Like, hey, why have you been on Soberlink 5 years? Oh, well, I just don't want to hear it from my husband. Well, there's something there to look at. Like
Oh, this
there's
particular husband was difficult.
yeah,
I
yeah, like
mean, I
there's
understand. I've
there's some
never
trust
advised anybody to be
issues.
on it 5 years. People ask me how long, and I say, well, I want you to, I say, you're not in a contract. You can stop me if you want. I'm going to recommend you do it for 3 months at least, because
Yeah,
that's 90 days of creating new habits and routines and that kind of
yeah,
thing. And then most people actually decide to stay on it longer on their own, but I don't make anybody do it, and I don't make anybody do it an amount of time. That was that woman. That's not the usual.
no,
But it
yeah, of
just
course.
tells you how sometimes it really does make your life easier.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I definitely think it's a. I mean, look, we're big proponents of use all the tools at your disposal
Hmm.
if you're the person that wants to get sober, right? And but as far as parents and family members, like sometimes I feel like they are looking, it's almost like they're just waiting for the other shoe to drop to be able to say, I told you, and that's
Right.
frustrating. That's one of my biggest, and we'll wrap this up soon, but with working with families and loved ones, it's really disheartening and frustrating to see family members that have such deep resentment and such. And I get it, I understand, but they don't put in the work, they don't put in the effort, they're not getting help on their own, whether that be through you or through Al-Anon or the church or having their own therapist or whatever,
Right.
and just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it's like, that it's really unfortunate because it puts that person in a position to where it's like they're doing it for you
Hmm.
rather than doing it for themselves. Oh, I
Right. It
can't,
feels like punishment, right?
exactly. That's
Hmm.
what I was looking for, like
Hmm.
punishment. And,
Hmm.
so, but yeah, well,
And when you hear stories like that, it just tells me that, I mean, the reason people get in that dynamic is because it's such a cat and mouse dynamic for so long.
yeah,
It's me saying, I know you're up to something, and then them saying, no, I'm not, you're crazy, and the gaslighting. And
yeah,
if you're still caught in that dysfunctional dynamic of, because the family member's usually been gaslit for so long that their whole thing is trying to prove that they know because they
yeah,
do. And the
yeah,
person keeps telling them they're crazy, and that did really happen, or they're over exaggerating or something. And so it just becomes this like, I'm trying to find evidence because I'm going to prove it. I'm like, first of all, you can prove it all day. They're going to tell you no to your face. Like, let's do it again. But it's just a sign that they're still in that cat and mouse dynamic. And that's so much of what we try to untie, because it's just not productive. It's just a power struggle, and it keeps people stuck. You, them, everybody else. It's not good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like this has been a great podcast. What do you think, Ben?
I've really enjoyed this. Like I said, like I try to remain open minded, and I'm always trying to get more effective at communicating a message to families, clients, and I've just always been a big fan, Amber, of the way that you break things down and explain things, because the the more palatable it is for somebody to hear, the simpler it is, the more they're going to hear, and
Absolutely. Right.
I'll, as a compliment, you've got a gift for explaining this stuff. You
Thank
take stuff
you.
that's
Thank you. I appreciate that.
can be very complicated and make it easy to understand. And I love
Right.
that.
Yeah. It just comes down to common sense. What's going to work better, positive reinforcement or negative? I mean, when you start to think about it, you're like, oh, yeah, like I knew that, you know?
Well, there seems to
Yeah,
be a lot of common sense lacking out there, though.
Well, you lose touch with it when you're desperate, right? But
Yeah.
when you bring yourself back to like, oh, yeah, it's obvious, like you knew
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, when you're in this situation, and Tom and I talk about this all the time, even with all our knowledge, education, and experience, if we're ever in the situation ourselves where there's an emotional tie and it's personal,
Mhm.
we can be blinded by it.
Oh, yeah.
And with all the knowledge that we have, you put it in my home, and I start handling it different than I would tell a family to.
Of course.
Yeah,
Right,
so
because now we bring the emotion into it.
exactly.
It's easy for me to say, do this, say this. Yes, it's
Mhm.
just real easy for me to say. Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame to do it.
yeah.
Definitely.
Well, Amber, it's been a blast having you on. Don't hang up whenever we're done recording.
I've enjoyed it. You guys are awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
really appreciate it. So you have Put the Shovel Down on YouTube.
That's right.
That's probably your main platform.
Hmm.
You do have a large Facebook group, right?
I do. I have a business Facebook page you can follow, but I also have a large um, closed group for family members. I mean, it doesn't cost anything, but you can get in there. It just gives you that sort of anonymity to be able to
Yeah.
talk with other people and get support back and forth. And I mean, that's a pretty good size. So there's a lot of conversations that happen in there.
Now, is that something they have to join your program to get access to?
No, they can just go to Facebook and just type it in. And there's a couple questions they have to answer, but it's basically just like,
Yeah.
I'm not a spammer. I'm in here because legit, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then we'll let you in, and then you can post anonymously, you can post as yourself, whatever feels comfortable.
And what's it called?
You can just look up Put the Shovel Down on Facebook.
Okay.
Hmm.
It's funny. I'll admit. I joined the group
Okay.
months and months ago, and I go in and I look at some of the posts, and I ask myself, almost like training myself, like, how would I respond to this? What would I do? And I look at what your moderators put, and I'm like, oh, that's spot on. Yeah, that's along the same lines. Or, ooh, they hit a point that I didn't think of. So I've used it personally to like almost like to quiz myself in a way, because there's so many different scenarios that we face.
Right.
It's
And
never
sometimes I'll
cookie
go in
cutter.
there when I don't have a video topic and I'll see, what's the theme here, right? Because it says these are things people are struggling with that they want to know about. So it's a great place to sort of look for, where are people getting stuck? What is it people want to know? Where they need help, that kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, and I'll say, if you want to know more about Soberlink, you can go to soberlink.com/Amber. And then there's a video on that page that literally shows me showing you everything about it, how it's set up. Like if you want to know like the ins and outs of it, soberlink.com/Amber. And there's like a whole tutorial in there. So you can kind of really understand how it works and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, Ben, any final thoughts?
No, thank you so much for your time and for linking up with us.
Same, enjoyed it. You can tell I just get excited. I love talking about other people that get excited and I just get worked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, appreciate it, Amber. All right, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.